Daniel dropped the divorce papers directly onto my newborn daughter's blanket. "Sign them, right now." I stared at him from the recliner in our living room, still wearing mesh hospital underwear beneath my sweatpants, because I had given birth to twins less than 72 hours earlier. One baby slept against my chest. The other cried softly in the bassinet beside me. And my husband, the man who once cried hearing their heartbeats for the first time, stood near the fireplace, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive gray suit like he was late for a business meeting instead of destroying his family. "Daniel," my voice cracked immediately, "please don't do this today." He wouldn't even look at me. I already signed my half. Outside rain tapped softly against the windows of our suburban Dallas home. Everything smelled faintly like baby powder and hospital disinfectant. The kind of smell that should have meant new beginnings. Instead, it smelled like the end of my life. My mother-in-law Barbara stood in the kitchen doorway holding her purse tightly beneath one arm. Not crying. Not shocked. Annoyed. "Well," she sighed dramatically, "we've all had difficult days, Sarah. Sitting around crying won't change reality." Reality. I looked down at the divorce papers shaking in my hands. Daniel Bennett requesting immediate dissolution of marriage. No contest. Primary asset separation already arranged. I could barely process the words through the exhaustion pounding behind my eyes. 3 days earlier, I'd nearly died giving birth. 36 hours of labor. Emergency surgery. 2 premature babies. And now this. "I don't understand," I whispered. Daniel finally looked at me then. Cold. Calm. Detached. The expression hurt worse than yelling would have. "You haven't been happy in a long time," he said flatly. I almost laughed from disbelief. Happy? I was recovering from carrying his children while surviving swollen ankles, chronic nausea, sleepless nights, and terrifying complications the doctors warned could kill me. Of course I wasn't glowing like a magazine wife. But before I could answer, Barbara crossed her arms. "My son deserves peace," she snapped. "And frankly, this house hasn't had peace in months." The baby in the bassinet started crying harder. I instinctively reached for her, wincing from the sharp pain in my abdomen. Daniel didn't move to help. Not even once. That's the moment something inside me truly broke. Not when I saw the papers. Not when Barbara insulted me. When the father of my children ignored the sound of his own daughter crying. A phone buzzed against the kitchen counter. Daniel glanced down immediately. And for the first time all morning he smiled. Not a big smile. Just soft. Warm. Intimate. The kind of smile I hadn't seen in over a year. My stomach turned. "Is it her?" I asked quietly. Barbara muttered under her breath, "Oh, for heaven's sake." Daniel slipped the phone into his pocket. "That's none of your business anymore." But I already knew. Vanessa. 31 years old. Real estate influencer. Expensive blonde hair, white teeth, perfect Instagram life. Daniel had started working late around the same time she began commenting on his social media posts. At first, I ignored the feeling in my gut. Then I got pregnant. And suddenly my husband started sleeping farther away from me in bed. Answering texts outside. Criticizing everything. The way I dressed. The weight I gained. The fact that I cried easily. The fact that I was tired. "You changed," he told me once during my 7th month of pregnancy. I remember sitting in the dark after he fell asleep, wondering how a man could resent the very sacrifice that was giving him children. Now I knew. Because he had already left emotionally long before he walked out physically. Daniel checked his watch. "I need those signed." The room went silent except for the babies crying softly. I looked at him for a long time. The man I met at 26. The man who brought me soup when I had the flu. The man who danced with me barefoot in our kitchen to old Frank Sinatra songs. Gone. Or maybe he was never fully real to begin with. My hands trembled violently as I picked up the pen. "Sarah," Barbara said impatiently, "dragging this out is embarrassing." Embarrassing. Not heartbreaking. Not cruel. Embarrassing. I signed. Quietly. One signature beneath another while tears slid silently down my face and onto my daughter's blankets. Daniel took the papers immediately. Relief flashed across his face so quickly it almost looked triumphant. Then he did something I will never forget for the rest of my life. He leaned down, Not toward me. Toward the babies. For one brief second, hope rushed through my chest. Maybe he was going to kiss them goodbye. Maybe somewhere deep inside him their father still existed. Instead, he simply stared at them. Like strangers. Then he straightened his jacket and walked toward the front door. "That's it," I whispered weakly. He paused. But he never turned around. "I'll have someone pick up the rest of my things next week." The door closed softly behind him. And just like that, my marriage ended quieter than I ever imagined possible. Barbara lingered awkwardly for several seconds afterward. Then she looked at me with something almost resembling pity. "You're still young," she muttered. "Maybe someday you'll find somebody who actually wants this kind of life." I stared at her in disbelief. "This kind of life?" She gestured vaguely toward the babies. Toward me. Toward motherhood itself. Then she left too. The house became unbearably silent after that. I sat there for what felt like hours holding my daughters, while sunlight slowly faded through the living room windows. No dramatic screaming. No broken dishes. Just emptiness. That night, while feeding one twin at nearly midnight, I turned on the television mostly to escape the silence. And there he was. Daniel. Standing beside Vanessa at some charity gala downtown. She wore a silver designer gown worth more than our monthly mortgage payment. The interviewer laughed while asking how they met. Vanessa smiled directly into the camera. Sometimes, she said sweetly, people meet the person they were truly meant to build a life with. Daniel smiled beside her. No guilt. No hesitation. Then Vanessa added something that made my blood run cold. Some women simply aren't strong enough to keep a successful man happy. The audience laughed lightly. I turned the television off immediately. For several seconds I just sat there in darkness, holding my sleeping daughters against my chest. Then slowly I looked toward the hallway closet. Inside it sat a dusty cardboard box I hadn't touched since my father died 2 years earlier. My father had spent 40 years as a local television journalist in Texas, and before he died he told me something I never forgot. "Your voice matters more than you think it does, sweetheart." Still trembling, I carried the babies toward the closet and pulled the box onto the floor. Inside were old notebooks, cassette recordings, press badges, and one yellow sticky note attached to the top binder in my father's handwriting. "When life breaks your heart, tell the truth anyway." I stared at those words for a very long time. Then, for the first time since Daniel walked out the door, I stopped crying. The twins developed opposite sleep schedules almost immediately. If Ava slept, Lily screamed. If Lily finally drifted off, Ava decided the world was ending. By the 3rd week after Daniel left, I honestly couldn't remember the last time I slept more than 90 consecutive minutes. The Dallas house felt too large now. Too quiet in some rooms. Too loud in others. Everywhere I looked, I saw evidence of abandonment. Daniel's empty side of the closet. The missing coffee mug he took because it was his favorite. The half-circle stain on the garage floor where his BMW used to sit every night. Some mornings I'd catch myself listening for the sound of his key in the front door before remembering he belonged to someone else now. The humiliation of that realization never got easier. Bills started arriving faster than I could process them. Hospital bills. Pediatric bills. Utility notices. Formula receipts. One afternoon I sat at the kitchen table with both babies sleeping beside me while I stared at my checking account balance and quietly panicked. Daniel had transferred exactly what the divorce agreement required. Nothing more. No extra support. No concern. Just legal obligation. Barbara sent one text message 2 weeks after he left. "You need to learn independence eventually." I deleted it immediately. Then cried for 20 straight minutes while folding baby laundry. That became my life for a while. Feeding. Rocking. Crying quietly. Repeating. Some nights I was so exhausted I slept sitting upright with one baby against each shoulder, because laying them down risked waking them again. But slowly tiny acts of survival started adding up. Mrs. Hernandez from next door began leaving casseroles on my porch every Sunday evening. The older cashier at Walgreens started slipping extra diaper coupons into my bags. A retired nurse from church volunteered to watch the twins for 2 hours every Thursday, so I could shower and grocery shop alone. People noticed when women were drowning, especially older women. They recognized the look because many of them had worn it once themselves. One rainy afternoon while the twins napped beside me, I opened my father's old journalism box again. At first I only meant to organize it. But then I found a cassette recording labeled, "First story I ever loved." Curious, I played it. My father's voice filled the room instantly. Warm. Steady. Familiar enough to make my throat tighten. Real journalism, he said in the recording, isn't about famous people. It's about ordinary folks trying to survive ordinary heartbreak. I sat there listening while my daughters slept. And for the first time in weeks, something besides grief moved inside me. Memory. Purpose. Before marrying Daniel, I used to write constantly. Small community stories. Local interviews. Human interest columns for the Dallas Morning News freelance section. Then life happened. Marriage. Schedules. Pregnancy. And somewhere along the way I stopped sounding like myself. That night, after both twins finally fell asleep around 2 a.m., I opened my old laptop and started writing again. At first it hurt. Everything hurt. My body. My pride. My heart. But the words came anyway. I wrote about an elderly widower who spent every Friday playing piano at a nursing home because he said loneliness sounded quieter with music in the room. I wrote about a waitress working double shifts to pay for her grandson's insulin. I wrote about ordinary people surviving invisible pain. And somehow writing about their resilience helped me survive my own. A week later, I emailed one story to a tiny local radio station. I expected nothing. Instead, 2 days later, my phone rang during a diaper change. "Is this Sarah Bennett?" an older man asked. "Yes. This is Frank Dalton over at KTXA Community Radio." He cleared his throat awkwardly. "You still writing?" I nearly laughed. Trying to... Well, he muttered, "Your piece made my secretary cry into her tuna sandwich." That became the closest thing to a job offer I'd heard in months. Frank was 68 years old with suspenders, thick glasses, and the exhausted voice of a man who'd spent decades fighting shrinking local news budgets. He also happened to know my father. "Best field reporter Texas ever had," Frank told me during our first meeting. Mean poker player, though. For the first time since the divorce, I genuinely smiled. The station couldn't pay much. Tiny freelance checks, late-night editing work, weekend voiceovers. But it was something. More importantly, it was mine. So while my daughters slept beside the desk in borrowed bassinets, I worked. I edited audio clips with one hand while holding bottles with the other. I interviewed local veterans during nap schedules. I recorded radio segments at midnight wearing spit-up stained sweatshirts. It was messy. Exhausting. Beautiful. Meanwhile, Daniel's life looked perfect online. Perfect vacations. Perfect rooftop dinners. Perfect smiling photographs beside Vanessa. Every few days, another picture appeared. #blessed, #new beginnings, #living authentically. I stopped looking eventually. Not because it didn't hurt, because it hurt too much. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. Frank assigned me a small story about a group of elderly veterans facing eviction from a retirement complex outside Fort Worth. Nothing glamorous. No celebrity angle. Just frightened old men trying not to lose the last place they still called home. I spent 2 days interviewing them while the twins stayed with Mrs. Hernandez. One widower showed me photographs of his late wife folded carefully inside his wallet. Another cried, describing how he couldn't afford both medication and rent anymore. When the story aired, something exploded. Calls flooded the station. Donations poured in. Within 48 hours, local businesses raised enough money to save the housing complex temporarily. And suddenly people wanted to know who reported the story. Frank walked into the studio grinning 3 days later. "Well," he announced proudly, "looks like America likes you." I blinked up at him sleepily. "What are you talking about?" He tossed a printed email onto my desk. "National Morning Today interview request." My stomach dropped. "No." "Yes." "No, absolutely not." Frank folded his arms. "Your father would haunt me personally if I let you say no." I stared at the email while panic and excitement crashed together inside my chest. Me. National television. I hadn't even fully healed from childbirth yet. Then my phone buzzed. A news alert notification. I almost ignored it. Almost. But curiosity won. The article headline froze me instantly. Real estate influencer. Vanessa Marlowe announces engagement to Dallas entrepreneur Daniel Bennett. Below it sat a glossy photograph of them smiling outside some luxury hotel. Daniel looked happy. Carefree. Like his daughters had never existed. I swallowed hard and locked my phone screen. Then slowly I looked back down at the interview request. And for the first time since signing those divorce papers, I realized my life might not be over after all. The morning of the interview, one of the twins threw up directly into my hair. Honestly, it felt on brand for my life lately. I stood in the bathroom of the tiny hotel room in Manhattan at 5:30 in the morning, trying to rinse formula out of my blonde curls while both babies cried from their portable bassinets near the bed. You girls are really committed to keeping me humble, I muttered sleepily. Outside the window, New York glowed gray and rainy beneath the early dawn. 20 minutes later, Frank knocked on the hotel door carrying coffee and enough nervous energy for both of us. You ready to become famous? He asked. I'd rather survive breakfast first. He laughed so hard he nearly spilled coffee onto the carpet. That laugh helped more than he probably realized. Because beneath my calm expression I was terrified. Not of television. Of being seen. Really seen. For months I'd hidden inside survival mode. Diapers, bills, loneliness, grief. Now suddenly millions of strangers were about to hear my voice. And somewhere in Dallas, Daniel might hear it too. The thought unsettled me more than I wanted to admit. At the studio, producers rushed everywhere wearing headsets while makeup artists powdered my face under blinding lights. One young assistant smiled warmly at the twins. Oh my gosh, they're adorable. Thank you, I whispered automatically. I still wasn't used to hearing kindness without suspicion attached to it. A few minutes before airtime, the host, Linda Mercer, a silver-haired woman in her 60s, beloved by half the country, walked over personally. You're Sarah, she asked gently. I nodded nervously. She glanced at the babies sleeping beside me. Then she squeezed my hand softly. You already survived the hard part, honey. And somehow those simple words steadied me. When the cameras finally rolled, I expected my voice to shake. Instead, something strange happened.